Activism consists of any intentional action to bring about social, economic, environmental, or political change. The foundation for activism usually requires three things. You have to perceive an injustice or oppression. You have to have a will to change that oppression or injustice. You have to have the ability to gather followers. So there are generally three categories that activism falls into: peaceful, radical, and political. And I have an example for all three. An example of peaceful activism is probably best exemplified by Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King advocated for anti-war, anti-violence protests in order to bring about the civil rights movement in the 1960s.
I don't think of love as, in this context, as emotional bosh. I don't think of it as a weak force. But I think of love as something strong and that organizes itself into powerful direct action. Now, this is what I try to teach in the struggle in the South, that we are not engaged in a struggle that means we sit down and do nothing. That there's a great deal of difference between non-resistance to evil and non-violent resistance.
Malcolm X is probably the best example of radical activism. Malcolm X advocated for the complete separation of black and white Americans. He also rejected the mainstream civil rights movement's campaign against nonviolence, saying that all African Americans should be able to protect themselves in any way possible.
This is American justice. This is American democracy. And those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy. Now, if I'm wrong, put me in jail. But if you can't prove that a democracy is not hypocrisy, then don't put your hands on me. Democracy is hypocrisy. If democracy means freedom, why aren't our people free? If democracy means justice, why don't we have justice? If democracy means equality, why don't we have equality?
The third and final form of activism is that of political activism, best exemplified by Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk became a supervisor in San Francisco around the 1970s to try and bring more attention to the gay rights campaign. He believed that the only way that the homosexual movement could move forward is if they became politically aware and active.
Know that there's hope for a better world. There's hope for a better tomorrow. Without hope, not only gays, but those blacks, and the Asians, and the disabled, the seniors, the us's, without hope, the us's give up.
Sadly, all three of these inspirational men were assassinated before they could see the rest of their civil rights campaigns come to an end. Now, it is important to note that Malcolm X's radical strategy is not necessarily the best strategy when going about activism. Being passionate about your cause is one thing, but being radical is an entirely different one. Both Martin Luther King Jr. and Harvey Milk both understood that the reason their causes advanced was because they did not use the eye for the eye strategy that Malcolm X favored, because they understood that it would just make everyone blind.